Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion, Rising Tensions in Lebanon, Prospects and Scenarios. I am Ludaina Al-Baalbaki, Communications Manager at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, and it's my pleasure to moderate this timely conversation. As you all know, Israel has stepped up its airstrikes across Lebanon in recent weeks, reportedly hitting Hezbollah positions in the south and in the Beqaa Valley, with heavy civilian casualties. This escalation comes at a time when Lebanon is still fragile, both politically and economically, and when the little hope for calm we had quickly vanished. There's also growing talk that Israel could be expanding its military campaign into Lebanon following the Gaza ceasefire. And both Israel and the US are still linking any plans for reconstruction to the issue of the disarmament of Hezbollah. So, to unpack these dynamics, I am joined today by three distinguished speakers. Mona Yacoubian, Director of the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Sami Nader, Director of the Institute of Political Science at St. Joseph University, and Mohanad Haj Ali, Deputy Director of Research at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Thank you all for being with us, and let's dive right in. So let's start with the broader regional picture and the diplomatic landscape shaping Lebanon's position today. Mona, let me begin with you. How would you interpret the current moment in Lebanon? Is this escalation part of a broader dynamic, or we are witnessing a distinct Israeli strategy specifically directed at Lebanon?
Thank you, Rudaina, and thanks to the Carnegie Middle East Center for inviting me. I'd start by saying I think Lebanon is at a pivotal moment. And I do want to sort of step back. Again, I'm offering you a perspective from Washington. And here I think the view is that Lebanon continues to stand before an incredibly important opportunity to embark on a new political, economic trajectory that features the restoration of state sovereignty, that addresses the need longstanding for reform. And of course, central to that is the prospect of seeking to disarm Hezbollah. Understanding this escalation that you note, I would say it's my sense that what Israel is doing in Lebanon is both tied to a very specific Israeli strategy for Lebanon, but also sits within a broader regional context. So let me, if I could, just unpack that very briefly. Well, I think we're seeing a very different Israel post October 7, 2023. We are seeing a different, more aggressive military posture, one that is premised on the idea that never again will there be an October 7 style attack in Israel. And I think this directly addresses how and why we are seeing Israel undertake the sorts of military interventions they are in Lebanon. And so while there is certainly a connection to Gaza, I don't view there to be a direct linkage between current moves toward a ceasefire in Gaza, and let's see if that holds. I think that's quite shaky, and a desire by Israel to pivot and now undertake a bigger or broader offensive in Lebanon. Rather, back to this point of a new paradigm for Israel, one in which I think it is seeking, in the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, to be a super Sparta in the Middle East. I think we are instead seeing perhaps, and unfortunately for Lebanon, what could be this new normal of a continued pace of strikes without going into a full-on confrontation. And again, I think it speaks very much to this imperative that Israel has. It's been described to me as preemption at all costs. And I think that's what we're looking at, but I do think it falls short of plans for an all-out military offensive in Lebanon.
Thank you, Mona. To what extent does the US maintain, in your opinion, a distinct diplomatic approach to Lebanon separate from Israel's policy in Lebanon? And how is this reflected in the current US engagement in Lebanon?
I think the US indeed maintains a distinct approach to Lebanon. It is certainly informed by equities that have to do with Israel. But I think going back to this notion of a pivotal moment, I do think we've seen a real increase of diplomacy on the part of the US, specifically through Ambassador Barak, and also to a lesser extent through the other special envoy or deputy envoy Morgan Ortagus, in which I think the US is seeking to translate the current situation on the ground in Lebanon. That is, this opportunity to proceed with disarming Hezbollah into a political opportunity for putting the country on a trajectory of reform and change. And so this is where I think you're seeing, for example, the sort of shuttle diplomacy between Israel and Lebanon. You're seeing Barak become quite involved in terms of the plan for disarmament. I think the concern that I would have is that perhaps there's not enough of an appreciation here in Washington of the sensitivities on the ground in Lebanon, of the trade-offs between pursuing disarmament perhaps quickly and aggressively in a way that I think runs the risk of tipping Lebanon into broader civil unrest. I'm not sure the extent to which that tension is fully appreciated. That said, I do think that there are efforts to sort of work quietly behind the scenes, diplomatically, to try to build trust and confidence with the Israelis, ideally to get them to begin to actually stand down from this pace of military strikes, to work with and strengthen the Lebanese armed forces. And I would note, just before the government shutdown that we are in the midst of, the Trump administration did put forth $190 million to strengthen the LAF. That's significant. And I think that signals this other piece of the strategy, which is an understanding that the best path forward for Lebanon is one of strengthening its state institutions, building up Hezbollah as the most important building up the LAF as the most important counterweight to Hezbollah. And ideally pairing that sort of strengthening and pushing for reforms with diplomacy in a way that will yield results on the ground. Ideally, again, perhaps a tapering down of strikes by Israel, and even ideally the beginning of a withdrawal from the 5 military posts that Israel continues to occupy. I think we're a ways from that still, but we don't know what behind the scenes diplomacy can yield, whether there can be a dramatic and unexpected breakthrough. We just saw that with Gaza. Maybe we could see that again with Lebanon.
Thank you so much, Mona. Mohanna, turning to you, when looking at the current dynamics, how might Iran's regional strategy influence developments in Lebanon? And to what degree could any conversation around Hezbollah's disarmament depend on a parallel understanding or trade-offs with Tehran?
Hello, Dan. Thank you for hosting this. The Iranian dynamics will definitely impact Hezbollah's calculations. Whether closer relations with Saudi Arabia, and that's a track that I think we should all keep our eyes on. This will impact Hezbollah and will impact Hezbollah's decision-making in Lebanon and its relations with the state, given the Saudi support to the state itself. The Iranian backdoor negotiations with the US and European actors will also impact their influence on Hezbollah. What we need to know is that the organization, during the past year, we learned a great deal on the level and extent of the Iranian role in directing in directing it. During the pager attack, for instance, that happened last year, the Iranian ambassador was injured. This is a device which was supposed to be used internally within the organization's core, and the fact that the Iranian ambassador was part of that group also raises questions on the extent of Iranian involvement. The killing of Hassan Nasrallah last year, an Iranian general was killed. Abbas Nil Furoshan was hailed by the Islamic Republic as a martyr in that strike. And the Israeli strike on Damascus, General Zahedi died, and he was named as a Shura Council member within Hezbollah. So within the organization's core leadership, or at least it was alleged that he was by a Hezbollah official who spoke to Reuters back then. The extent is larger than we had anticipated and accepted in the past. And now with the shift in Hezbollah's leadership from Hassan Nasrallah to Naim Asim, who's seen as a weaker character and less so in control of the organization's internal dynamics, as in the case of Nasrallah, who was charismatic, had more influence over his party core. Naim Asim doesn't have that clout. And so I think it's safe to assume that Iran's influence and direction over the organization is even higher than it was during Nasrallah. So in that sense, I think Hezbollah is pretty much linked to the Iranian policy, but with the caveat that the organization is also locked in a political alliance with the Amal movement under what we know locally in Lebanon as the Shia duo. And so in that sense, there are a number of internal Lebanese calculations that have to be taken into account, and I think will impact Hezbollah's ability to make the kinds of decisions that Nasrallah did in 2023 and led us here to this point in Lebanon. And I think, as we say that the dynamics when it comes to the relationship between Hezbollah as an organization and Iran has shifted and after the killing of Nasrallah, I think it's also safe to assume that the dynamics within the Shia duo have shifted towards Nabih Berri now even more than in the past, and that the relationship within that alliance has also shifted. So I think there are complexities and nuances that we need to look at when it comes to how the decision making will happen in Lebanon and how Iran has to navigate these issues. And we are seeing, Iranian officials coming in more often to Beirut than before and meeting different parts of the political class, which I think suggests that Iran is interested in navigating the internal complexities of Lebanon.
Thank you so much, Mohamed, for these interesting points. You've already started to address internal dynamics, you and Mona. We will be addressing internal dynamics towards the end of a little bit later. But for now, let me ask you, what in your view is the current state and cohesion of the axis of resistance, and how united or fragmented does it appear amid all of these shifting dynamics that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, Rudaina, in the past we used to say axis of resistance because we had Syria. Syria's Assad, a great country, was in the middle of it. Now this is no longer the case. I think probably we should change the name and speak about Iran and its network of influence, for instance, across the region. I think that's more kind of describing of the reality that Iran is in. And I think Iran and its network are both on the defensive right now. They're not really creating or paving new policy arenas or creating alliances, etc. they are on the defensive, trying to save what's left of their capabilities. And I think this will remain for a while now. This will be the case for the foreseen future. Iran is trying to preserve itself, rebuild its own defenses. The air defenses were destroyed during the last conflict. Its leadership was impacted, and they had to shift. And of course, when it comes to defense and defense focus, they have in Lebanon and as in Iraq, they're trying to face and fend off pressure from the state as the issue of disarmament became part of the political agenda in both countries. And I think this is descriptive of even in places where we can see the axis is more forthcoming, like in Yemen, for instance. I think the airstrikes that we've seen in the past year will have an impact on the Houthi movement ability to face any challenges that will come their way in the upcoming months. And I'm sure there are plans to push against the Houthi control and the Houthi sphere of influence in Yemen in the next months. So I think in looking at the state, Iran is dealing with new sanctions that have been put back now on it. There will be difficulties. That's something that we can anticipate. But if we look back at the first Trump administration, when the maximum pressure campaign was introduced, we saw a violent reaction that did break a lot of norms in the region. But since then until now, I think new regional security architecture has come in place. And a good core of that is the Saudi-Iranian relationship. And whether that will stand the test of time, it seems plausible that it will. So it's something that we have to keep an eye on. I think Iranian-Saudi relations are an important driving force in what comes, unlike what we've seen during the first Trump administration.
Thank you, Muhannad. And back to you, Mona. My question is about the US-Iran negotiations. They remain stalled, but there is growing speculations, or at least we keep reading and hearing, about a potential larger confrontation with Tehran, like the one we have seen previously. I think it was in June. How could these developments shape the situation in Lebanon, both on the military level and on the diplomatic level?
Thank you, Rudaina. Yeah, I believe that the likelihood of resumption of hostilities between Israel and Iran is greater now than it's been. We've seen the imposition of snapback sanctions, so the reimposition of UN sanctions, and as a result, and US sanctions as well, Iran sort of taking a more entrenched position, now once again suspending cooperation with the IAEA. There's concern that Iran could withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Don't know that they will do that, but we're also hearing, and hearing in the ether here, concerns by Israel that Iran is, potentially has the ambition to restart enrichment, and interestingly enough, also restore its ballistic missile capability, which to me is adding another element to this. So all of which is to say, as these tensions rise, I think it's becoming more likely than not that we could see Israel resume hostilities against Iran. I don't believe, it's not clear to me that the US will join again as it did in June. I think the view from Washington, certainly what you hear from President Trump, is this sense that, the nuclear program was obliterated, i.e. there's no need for the US to get back involved. And I think there are real pressures here in Washington for the US not to be engaged in an open-ended conflict with Iran. So what does that mean for Lebanon? I think taking Muhannad's analysis, which I very much agree with, I think if you see a weakened Iran, it's already weakened now. If it has to absorb additional hits from Israel, I think that weakens it further. And to my mind, that raises questions as to, okay, what are therefore the opportunities diplomatically for Lebanon? Does a weakened Iran eventually really end up sort of acquiescing to the reality in Lebanon, which is a move to disarm Hezbollah? And what does that look like? Does it open a pathway, in other words, for diplomacy? I don't, if I'm understanding you militarily, I don't see Lebanon really certainly getting drawn into this. I don't see Hezbollah in a position, although I defer to those there in Lebanon to differ with me, but I don't see Hezbollah in a position to play any sort of role in terms of going after Israel or anything like that. So I guess for me, what we will see is a continuation of the power dynamics we're already witnessing, which is a weakening of Iran, and potentially as a result of that, an opening up of a pathway toward diplomacy. We haven't seen it yet, but the last thing I'll say on this, it is also interesting to note, in his speech to the Knesset, Donald Trump also raised this idea of negotiations with Iran and some sort of negotiating some kind of a deal with Iran. I think the hope had been, again, I think we don't fully understand here in Washington the dynamics in the region. The hope had been coercing and pressuring Iran increasingly will lead it to come back to the table on the terms of the U.S. I don't know that we understand that sometimes that actually pushes Iran further into a more entrenched position. But I think that's, again, I think for Lebanon, I think over the longer term, maybe this ends up opening possibilities for a more negotiated disarming of Hezbollah rather than a coming clash with Hezbollah.
Thank you, Mana. And Sami, what role might regional and international actors, particularly KSA and other GCC countries and European partners, can play in supporting stabilization or preventing a deeper slide into confrontation if a confrontation is to happen? Where do you see realistic space for the engagement of these powers, whether in diplomacy, mediation, maybe reconstruction planning? Sami, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for that. First of all, I would like to thank you for hosting me, and I'm very glad to be as part of this distinguished panel. Back to your question, I think the international community and mainly the Arab friends and the European can work at least on two tracks. The first track is supporting the Lebanese army, because the period today, this year is the year of the Lebanese army, given that is in charge of implementing the task, the central task that everyone is expecting from outside and from inside, which is the disarmament of Hezbollah, or extending the full sovereignty of the state or the monopoly of arms, as it was stated in the speech of the inaugural speech of the president. This is a central question, and this is the golden gate for Lebanon to recover its full sovereignty and for economic recovery as well. So, and this is why the Lebanese army that is suffering, or that's paying the price of the financial collapse of 2019 needs financial and military support in terms of equipment, I mean. And this is badly needed. Some countries are taking the lead, mainly Washington. But on the financial side, I think that GCC countries, KSA can contribute, and they are showing readiness, provided they are offered the deeds and the evidence that the implementation plan of the Lebanese army is going in the right way. And this is a responsibility of the Lebanese army today to show that is seriously implementing what it has been promised. The other track where the Arab countries and the European can play a role is to support this dynamic of change that happened and that resulted in the election of a president and the nomination of a government with a new modus operandi, where, for instance, Hezbollah does not have anymore the veto power. And the exact dynamic that was triggered by the team of five, the United States, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and France. And this committee of five is badly needed today. This dynamic has vanished after the election of a new president, and we can understand, and the nomination of the government. In my view, this is today something similar is needed. Why? Because we're seeing this dynamic of change vanishing to the profit of what we call the deep state. And the Raushi event is the proof that this dynamic can lose, or this dynamic of change can lose momentum, and it needs to be supported by the friends of Lebanon, namely those you mentioned.
Thank you so much, Sami. I want to focus now on Hezbollah itself, calculations, capabilities, and possibly next moves. So, Mohamed, I will start with you. Has Hezbollah managed to rebuild its military capabilities? And how would you describe Hezbollah's current calculations, both in terms of deterrence vis-a-vis Israel or its political positioning within Lebanon?
Well, what we know is what Hezbollah has been saying. They've been saying that they did rebuild their own military capabilities. And now they're ready to engage again with Israel in case they're attacked or another Israeli operation will become underway. Of course, this rhetoric is part of deterrence, or what's left of deterrence, basically trying to tell the Israelis not to expand their area of operations too much. I'm not sure if it will work. I don't think this is the case nowadays, but I think the organization could have rebuilt some of its capabilities. But at the same time, the question that begs itself is that the Israelis have been striking it every day since the end of the ceasefire, the beginning of the ceasefire agreement last year on November 27. And that has resulted in the killing of at least 200 Hezbollah members, because we have the full tally of that number, which is about in the 300s. And the Lebanese health ministry is saying about 100 plus of these are civilians. So if we calculate the number who are not civilians, they're in the 200, and that's a large number. That's a huge number. We're saying about one Hezbollah member or cadre every day killed. I'm not sure the organization can replace that. You know, it takes more than a day to replace a cadre or a trained member. And I suppose the organization has suffered when it comes to losing its trained personnel in that regard. And in terms of weaponry, they don't have the supply line is no longer there with Iran via Syria, that land corridor. And also when it comes to the stricter controls of the Lebanese state, it's there. The Lebanese army is now reporting every month on its operations to disarm Hezbollah, you know, regardless of how wide these activities are, but they're happening. You know, we're seeing some evidence that the army is going in and taking some of the Hezbollah ammunition. I find it difficult to imagine how they can replenish what they're losing and on that front. Perhaps they're focusing on certain arenas that worked during the, or certain lines of weaponry that worked during the war. For instance, perhaps more precision drones and such missiles as they've used in the past conflict and worked. They could do that, but I don't see really an effort to address the great gap in firepower and technological capabilities that we saw between both sides in the last conflict. I think it's quite difficult to address that, specifically when you're under fire every day. I find it difficult to believe what the organization is saying. So in short, I don't think they have the capability to change the course of events in case a conflict erupts. They could be more lethal. Israel doesn't have the same surprise element that it had in the last conflict. It doesn't have the same cards, at least we can assume so. I mean, given the massive surprises that we saw last year, these are quite difficult to replicate. So that might change the overall balance. I don't see a massive shift that would help address the great gap that we saw last year.
Thank you, Mohannad. When looking at Hezbollah and Hamas, what similarities or differences stand out to you in their strategic approaches or the outcomes that they have faced and they continue to face? How might Hezbollah view the kinds of arrangements that we have seen Hamas recently accept in Gaza?
It's quite ironic to look at the past 2 years and how, what was presented to us as the strategic unity of arenas alliance that Hezbollah had put in place, a NATO-like alliance between non-state actors, which included Hamas and Hezbollah at the core of it. That what was presented then at the first test, which is October 7, Hezbollah was not aware of the attack. Such a massive attack, the organization was not aware. And it was taken in by surprise, dragged on the 8th into the conflict, and then paid the ultimate price last year. And it's ironic that now, as Hamas accepted this deal, it has, I think, backstabbed Hezbollah again, in the sense that it accepted a deal in which disarmament and the disappearance of the armed struggle engagement of Hamas in Gaza is on the table. And now the Lebanese parties, which are opposed to Hezbollah's weapons, can bring this paper and tell Hezbollah, look, your strategic ally has signed a paper, a document saying, yes, we accept no resistance status after this deal is done. And I think that's a precedent that will have implications on Hezbollah, politically speaking, at least. And also it sets a blueprint or a roadmap for how we can move away from the previous order in which Hezbollah was an armed group and it was acting regardless of the state or the political process that exists in the country which is hosting that group.
Thank you so much, Mohannad. I'd like to ask Mona or Sami now if they'd like to comment on the question of Hezbollah's calculations and capabilities before we turn to Lebanon's internal dynamics.
Maybe, no, my remark is related to Lebanon, actually, because I would like to emphasize one point that Mohannad mentioned, maybe at the very beginning, when he said that the increasing influence of Iran on Hezbollah, especially after the decapitation of its leadership. and Iran filled the void that was left by the killing of Nasrallah Safiyuddin, and today it's hands-on on Hezbollah. And this is strengthening the link between the question of Hezbollah and what needs to take place at the regional level. And that more than ever, I mean, Iran is, in my view, is using Hezbollah as a bargaining chip, but as a major leverage in its negotiation.
Thank you, Sami. This actually serves as a great transition to our next section on Lebanon's internal dynamics. So I will turn to you, Sami, to ask you, there's obviously increasing pressure for Lebanon to address the question of the disarmament of Hezbollah and the state's monopoly over the use of force. And Lebanon has committed to a deadline for progress on this front. Has there been, in your opinion, any indication of progress on the disarmament issue? I know you mentioned that the Lebanese, the LAF, needs to act on it, but has there been any tangible progress, and how this process might evolve in your opinion?
This is a $1 million question, actually, because the signals are very conflicting. And there are mixed signals because even the last session of the Council of Ministers, where the Lebanese army has published its first report, nothing has been leaked to the public. And this is, I mean, this should not be the case, in my view. I mean, the government should be very transparent on this very critical question for the future of Lebanon. That said, and what's creating this uncertainty is the fact that you are getting mixed signals, as I mentioned. On one hand, you hear Mr. Barak, who is directly in charge of accompanying this as an envoy of the Washington, openly criticizing the Lebanese side for not doing enough in terms of disarming Hezbollah. And 1 week after, you see that Washington has deblocked 2 financial aid packages to the Lebanese army. And you hear Mr. Trump in front of the Knesset having very kind words of support to the Lebanese president in its role of disarming Hezbollah. So there are these mixed signals. My conclusion is that definitely the Lebanese authority took the right decision when they made it clear they want to disarm Hezbollah, to exert the sovereignty of the state all over Lebanon, to have the monopoly of arms, but in terms of implementation, they are not doing enough. And this is where I think that this internal dynamic need to be supported by an international one in order to get concrete result. Otherwise, the alternative is the resumption of war. Today, Lebanon is a very similar situation than in Gaza. Either, especially that now they completed the phase 1, and the phase 2 is about security, and the question of disarming Hamas is the first issue. And this is the same in Lebanon. So unless Hezbollah does not disarm, the only alternative is for Israel to resume the war, and with all the justification it will get to do so.
How do you think, Sami, Lebanon's leadership and institutions, particularly the army, are navigating this phase of internal confrontation from time to other with Hezbollah, but also external pressure and challenge?
I mean, up to now, I think that what they failed to do, they are doing the right thing, but what they failed to do is to come up with a schedule for the operation with a deadline. You said that yes, they have a deadline until the end of the month in order to complete the implementation of 1701. But what for the rest? And here we're not talking only about the south of Litani. We're talking about disarming Hezbollah all over Lebanon. And the calculation, I think Mona started by saying that there is a paradigm shift in the Israeli mentality, and this is very true in that sense that Israel is determined to close this front for Lebanon. In my view, for one simple reason, that the resident of the north of Israel did not come back to their home. And all the more that there are UN resolution in that sense, mainly the 1559 that calls for disarming all military organization over the territory of Lebanon. And this, in that sense, I mean, the Lebanese army needs to come up with the implementation plan and with a very clear schedule on at what time, what task needs to be achieved. And up to now, this I don't have the impression that this is done. It's true that they have presented a plan. This plan is in phases, but up to now, it needs more commitment in terms of dates of execution.
But Sami, do you believe that Lebanon is in a realistic position to deliver, given the current political balance within Lebanon and the security environment?
If you see where, I mean, never Lebanon has been in a position that is favorable for the state to be a state. Given the change of the balance of power at the regional level, given the international support it gets, never Lebanon has been the place where all the envoys from all over the Arab world, the United States of America is practically, we have a US envoy every single month or twice a month in Lebanon. And this is the most important thing, that there is a large consensus in Lebanon around this issue. Hezbollah used to rely on a large majority in the parliament, which is not the case anymore. Hezbollah used to rely on a veto power inside the government, which is not the case anymore. My fear and my concern is that this opportunity will not stand forever. And Lebanon can miss the opportunity. But if this is the case, the problem is not that we will be back on the same situation where we were before October 7th, but it would be the next round of military operation and the resumption of war.
Thank you so much, Sami. Mona, I'd like to hear from you. Do you agree with Sami on the alarming scenario that he is presenting if the end of the year comes and the process is not accomplished?
Yeah, I don't fully agree. I agree certainly with this idea that the window of opportunity is closing. That I totally agree with. But I would maybe push back in a few different ways on what I've heard. One, I think we shouldn't overestimate Iran's power and influence. Okay, so if Iran is coming more often or whatever, I think that Muhannad's analysis is one that I share, which is Iran has been dramatically weakened. It lost its land bridge in Syria. It has not been able to use the Lebanese airport as a transshipment point for financing, for arms, etc., or overland. I think we shouldn't overestimate or overplay Iran's role here. And because I think if we do that, we potentially lose the opportunities that I was trying to articulate, which is a weakened Iran creates opportunity, creates opportunities to exploit in terms of the situation on the ground in Lebanon. At the same time, I also think we shouldn't underestimate what the Lebanese government has accomplished so far. And again, I'm an outsider. I'm watching this from the outside. But watching it from the outside, it looks not insignificant. Regaining control of the airport. I remember in 2008 when there was an effort to just take control of the telecommunications network, and it provoked, Hezbollah to undertake a mini, assault against West Beirut. We're in a different place. Much of the, as I understand it, much of the disarming has been accomplished south of the Litani. That is notable, and it should be acknowledged. At the same time, one can understand the need for the Lebanese government to be, hold closely these details. I do agree it needs to have a better communication strategy. It needs to figure out a better way to convey what it is able to do. But I think underestimating what the Lebanese government and the LAF have accomplished so far also doesn't serve the purpose of taking advantage of this window of opportunity. I would also highlight, and I think the idea of Israel, absolutely, again, I think this notion I tried to lay down at the beginning of preemption at all costs, it is most relevant in Lebanon. They are most concerned about Lebanon. It is correct, Sammy, that there are still some number of Israelis who have not moved back to the north. Some have, but I'm told it's mostly the older generation. The younger generations don't want to go back there. That's a problem for Israel. Obviously, they have to figure out how to address these concerns. And they say, I say, well, why maintain these 5 posts? Militarily, they have no purpose. And the answer is no. It is strategically, it is to provide a sense of protection for those that would seek to go back to their homes in the north. And so we have to continue to undertake or take into consideration the Israeli position on this. And this is where I think the U.S. comes in, my last point, where I think the U.S. does have a super important role to play. But let me say from the outset, this is a very different Washington. This is a place where we don't have the conventional policy apparatus in place. It is a very personalized form of diplomacy. You note the role of Tom Barak in particular, Morgan Ortagus, the president himself. We don't have a large bandwidth here, a big, offices at the State Department or the NSC who are driving this policy. It's very idiosyncratic and personality driven. And so that makes it, I think, hard to work with. I also think that we're seeing an interesting shift. It used to be that U.S. policy on Lebanon was derivative of its focus on Iran. I think that's less the case because of Iran's diminished influence. I do think, though, it is somewhat derivative of Israel and how the U.S. perceives Israeli interests and imperatives. And so at the end of the day, I think it is for the U.S. to play this bridging, catalyzing role between figuring out how to calibrate and assistance not only to the LAF, but also starting to fill in with economic development. If it's not coming from the U.S., it won't come from the U.S., but likely it will come from the Gulf. I think those steps, they have to be calibrated. It can't be that Hezbollah has to be fully disarmed before any of this assistance comes in. These things are interrelated. And lastly, I'm not so sure, I could be wrong on this, but I'm not sure that if by the end of the year, Hezbollah isn't fully disarmed all across Lebanon, you will see the U.S. encouraging all hell to break loose. I don't necessarily see that the case. I think that there's reasoned diplomacy going on behind the scenes, and perhaps, again, the U.S. playing this bridging role between Israel and Lebanon and seeking to find ways to bridge the differences and, frankly, bring Lebanon onto a soft landing where, again, its aspirations are realized for regaining its sovereignty, for disarming Hezbollah, for pursuing reform, and where Israel sort of is able to back off and focus on frankly its own healing internally. I think that's the goal, and I don't know if we have the entire apparatus in place to achieve it, but there's certainly a priority there that the president has placed in Tom Barrack, among others, to try and move that agenda forward.
Thank you, Mona. Actually, your analysis brings a little bit of hope to what you're seeing from DC is slightly different than what most of the observers are describing, seen here from Beirut. I want to turn to Muhannad now, because Muhannad, you mentioned the Amal movement, and you mentioned the duo, الثنائي. Can one realistically expect Harakat Amal to have any influence over Hezbollah in the context of disarmament? How might such an influence be exercised if we're trying to imagine it?
Yeah, thank you, Rodina, and thank you, Mona and Sami, for your comments. The Shia duo, I think, became the Lebanese vehicle to speak to. I mean, it's the political entity that could drive, I think, Hezbollah into disarmament. And it was one of the legacies of Hassan Nasrallah. This is an alliance that Hassan Nasrallah emphasized the importance of, the Shia unity, basically, he called it. These are two Shia groups that were in civil war. One disarmed, so Amal movement disarmed, and at the end of the civil war, or at least publicly disarmed. Maybe they have some weapons on the side, but in a large sense, it became a political group involved in the Lebanese state, and they have a large stake in the Lebanese project, and they want it to work because they want the public sector salaries to come in. They want to stay part of the Lebanese government and state institutions, and they want to continue the course in the next phase. So I think this is why Amal has a great leverage over Hezbollah and will continue to do so, specifically because of that. They want they want the Lebanese state to function and to pay the salaries, and they want their investment in it to succeed. So I think this is one side of it, and the second one is now Amal movement is in close contact with the Iranian regime, and I think they will continue that line of contact in addition to their relationship with Hezbollah, which Naim Asim emphasized as a strategic goal, to keep that unity in place. So I think that's important for them, and that will continue in the next phase. So they do have a leverage because of that, and also because the organization Amal and has also different viewpoint of the past conflict and what lessons should be drawn from it. And I think this will impact their thinking and their relationship with Hezbollah.
Thank you so much, Muhannad. My next question is about another dark scenario. What do you think are the risks of internal confrontation within Lebanon itself, given how the internal dynamics have evolved over the past months? Sami mentioned the Rawshe incident, but other escalations and other particular incidents happened. So that's my first question, and I have a follow-up question, but maybe later.
Yeah, I think when we speak about the confrontation, we're speaking about the Lebanese state or the army and Hezbollah. One thing to note, and I think Sami spoke about this, is the army is not really in a great state. The army has been impacted deeply by the 2019 crisis. And I think that's one caveat in the US strategy. They're linking economic recovery with disarmament of Hezbollah. They're taking economic recovery, I think, not only the US, but also Arab states, to the disarmament of Hezbollah. The state will not recover unless you disarm Hezbollah. But to disarm Hezbollah, you need a strong army. And to get a strong army, you need economic recovery. So there's really a loophole here, and I think that doesn't work and doesn't add up. And I find it difficult to see the army, whose 1/3 of its core, at least 1/3, is comprised from Lebanese Shia, will enter into a direct confrontation with Hezbollah without having implications on its own unity. This is an army which is basically paying deflated salaries to its employees, about $200-300 to each soldier or officer, and that's a very small amount to expect from someone to engage in a civil conflict. And I think what they're doing already is to be to be praised, given their current economic difficulties. And add to that the fact that Israel is not bringing anything to the table. So we had the Barak paper, which was brought in. The government approved of this, and the Amal movement was pushing the Shia duo here to approve this agreement, and it would lead to disarmament. But it would also lead to Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon, and would also lead to a real ceasefire in which there will be a cessation of hostilities and destruction. But the Israeli side was not willing to engage with this proposal, although it was a US proposal with US guarantees and US mechanism. And I think that's something that the US administration has to address in the next phase. What sort of mechanism could they bring to the table, and which includes Israeli deliverables? Because now what we see is only a long list of things for an army to deliver, with no carrots on the table.
Thank you, Mohannad. I think this is going to be my last question, and it's addressed to you, Sami. Could you describe to me the relationship? How do you see the relationship between Hezbollah and the Lebanese state, key institutions, and the Lebanese army?
As long as there was no pressure on the question of disarming Hezbollah, they found like a compromise with the President of the Republic. And every time that the Prime Minister was bringing the issue, he was demolished by the organization. What I wanted to say, to follow up on what Mohannad was saying, and because this will not be an easy task for the Lebanese authority. Definitely disarming Hezbollah may be as difficult as disarming Hamas, may be more difficult. But one has to get advantage of this regional dynamic. And one key difference with the question of Hamas and the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah, that's on the question of disarming Hezbollah, you practically have a total alignment of the Arab countries and the international community, except Tehran, except Iran. And one needs to think of ways to capitalize, to leverage on this dynamics that we have seen in Sharm el-Sheikh to support the Lebanese government in the direction of fulfilling this task. I think here there is an opportunity, and there is also a responsibility for the friends of Lebanon.
On that note, thank you so much, Sami. Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Mohannad, for your thoughtful insights. This has been a really rich and timely discussion. It helped us unpack the many layers of the Lebanon's current situation. And I thank you. I also thank our audience for joining us. Please continue following our work at the Carnegie Middle East Center for more analysis, and have a good day.